and welcome back. This is Sherry with Heart and Soulful. I'm back in the studio today with another video on shadow boxes. So if you are just joining me for the very first time, welcome. I hope you enjoy this video. If you do, please give me a thumbs up. Click on subscribe if you haven't already. And then if you click the little bell, you'll receive a notification when I do post a new video. So I have been working for the last several weeks now. This will be episode number 12 in a series called Gel Print Art. If you have not watched the series, I will put a link down below in the description so you can start back from the beginning if you'd like. The very first couple of videos were creating actual gel prints and then turning those gel prints by cutting off the white edges that are left. You know, when I do a gel print, I don't like to see these white edges. So I trim these off all the way around and then create these what I call stripy papers that are from the gel prints, and then lots of maybe some stitching and lots of pen work. So from this, then I can create all kinds of other artwork projects. So the very first video shows you some of the projects that I had created that were going to end up in the series. And then from there, I've just been kind of adding to as I come up with ideas. So in episode 10, I did a demonstration on how to create a shadow box out of an old book. And this is the book I actually used in the video. And then in episode 11, I showed you how I finished the piece of artwork that went inside, and just kind of went over my process doing that. So that was a shorter video. Today I decided to go ahead and do another one. This shadow box here was the very first experiment I did with plastic instead of glass. And I did this because I had created this piece of artwork using gel prints and found objects and some stitching and all kinds of things, and I needed the thickness of a shadow box. So that's what gave me the idea. I didn't have a shadow box at the time, and so I just made one out of a book. This video I want to do is, I had shown in episode 10 that these were two shadow boxes I had made out of Reader's Digests. And I did not record this for viewing on YouTube, and I didn't have any more Reader's Digest books at the time, so I used an old book. I wanted to go ahead and do another video using Reader's Digest books because they are very good for this type of project. They're the perfect depth. The pages are all nice and even, and the books are more sturdy than maybe using an older book. In this one, I ended up having to alter my original idea as far as the hanger and the closure, because it was an old book and it was a little bit loosey-goosey. So these are super easy to work with. They're readily available. You can find them at thrift stores, antique stores, online, on eBay, on Etsy, garage sales. They're usually about $5 to purchase a book. So I found 6 more, and so I wanted to go ahead and do another video using Reader's Digest books because they'll be consistent in the measurements that you need to take, and I can actually share those with you. And because I have 6 going, I have them at different stages, so I think this will be just a much more precise, comprehensive tutorial than even the last one, now that I've made a few of these. So let me first show you an actual shadow box so that you can understand, if you have not ever purchased one of these, the construction, so that you can kind of get the idea of what we're going for. So when you take the back off of the shadow box, you can see inside there is the piece of glass on the front is not removable. It's in there, but you can get in and clean from the inside and from the outside. And then there is a spacer here that's capturing that glass and keeping it from falling back. And then there's a recess here for your artwork. So that's what we're going to create, but just using a book. So you could do it with spacers like this, but to me that was extra parts and pieces you needed. We're going to use the book pages and cut them in a way that we create this little spacer inside. And then your artwork, you pay attention to the thickness of that fits inside but that way you're able to do a three-dimensional piece of art because you have all of this space in between created by that little spacer. Okay, so that's what we're going to be making today. So the first thing that you need is your Reader's Digest book, and they're all the same size. So this way the measurements will all be the same. So what I start with first is I'm going to start with the front, because I need to create my opening, which will help me create the openings in the different sizes to do that little step that we need. So I'm going to be using a piece of 4x6 glass. A Reader's Digest book measures about 5.5 inches wide by almost 7 3/4 tall. So a 4x6 piece of glass is a nice size. If you can see that, it's a nice size opening for this size of a book. When you are choosing a book, if it's something other than a Reader's Digest, you want to pay attention to that book block because the cover is a little bit larger. And so when you're choosing the size glass that you want to use, you need to make sure you have enough width left on either side for that kind of spacer. It doesn't have to be, you could probably do a little bit larger piece of glass if you wanted. This one here, I used a piece of craft plastic and I made it as large as I could because my art piece was already created. So I was creating the book to fit the art. In this case, we're going to create art to fit the book, the shadow box that we're making. So you just want to be aware of that book block, which is 5 1/4 by 7 3/8. So that's just something to be aware of when you're choosing this, so that you make sure you have enough border around the whole thing. So the first thing that I did is figured out my dimensions for centering my glass. Now you can see that the lines that I've drawn are smaller than my glass because I don't want my glass to fall through the front. So I'm leaving 1/4 inch all the way around for the glass, 1/4 inch in to accommodate this. So for me, the measurement ended up being is this inside piece, then instead of 4x6 is going to be 3.5 by 5.5. So to measure for that, you want to just measure it. It ended up being 1 1/16 inch. I'm working in inches, top and bottom, and then 7/8 of an inch in. And then because it's difficult to find this measurement because that's where the edge of your book is, I just measured my 3.5 over and created that line. And then I didn't do it on here, but to me it's easier if you extend your lines when you're drawing them on. You won't see this later because it's going to be in the book, glued in, is extend those lines out, those corners, because when you're cutting and you have a ruler laying on it, it's nice to be able to see where you're going to cut through without going too far. So that's the first step, step one. In the previous ones, I used an X-Acto knife, which is much smaller. You know, the blade and the handle and everything are, you know, something like this. Especially if you're arthritic, this is much harder to work with. So I went and got a heavier duty knife, and it cut through much faster, and it's more ergonomic for me. So I suggest getting a heavier knife like this. So to cut this, I'm just using a metal ruler. I'm going to lay it there, and you can see now as I lay this on the line, if I didn't have these lines coming out, I couldn't see where I need to start and stop. So you just take your time. It only took me maybe 6 passes to get through this cover. So you're just going to go, you know, slow and steady and get that cut out, okay? So I've already have one ready that I've cut out. And I like to keep the piece of glass that I'm working with each book because they may not be exactly perfect or the same. So the next step, once you've cut this out, using this larger knife, I was able to get much nicer, perfect, cleaner cuts than with the smaller X-Acto knife. So I don't really need to do anything to this, but if you do find out that your cut wasn't quite straight or it's a little imperfect, you can take an emery board and just use that as if you're sanding wood and just sand that. You can also use sandpaper, but I find this to be really easy. So you want to just make sure your line is nice and clean. And then the next thing that we need to do is we need to cut out the piece for the glass. So what you want to do is you want to section off enough pages that covers the thickness of your glass. So it might be different for everyone. These pieces of glass that I have are pretty thin because I bought picture frames at the dollar store. So they were $1.25 a piece, just so that I can rob the glass out of them. But in my case, the picture frames that I found I liked too, so I can use those for pieces of artwork that don't need glass. So that was just an inexpensive thing. Garage sales again, maybe you have an old picture frame that you can rob the glass out of, that kind of thing. So I'm sectioning off a number of pages that will hold my glass, and then I use maybe a piece of cardboard or something so that I don't go all the way through. And then for this, I want to cut the size of my glass because I want to have it recess before I glue this down. So first I took a pencil, and I know this is 3.5 by 5.5. So I just mark that out so I know exactly where my glass needs to go. And then I measured my 1/4 inch all the way around to my 4x6 piece. So I need to cut out now the 4x6. So this 3.5 by 5.5 mark is only there so that I could draw in my 4x6 and get it in the right place. Okay, so that would be your next step. So the thickness of your glass, put something to protect, make your marks, and cut that out. So in this one, I have already cut out that piece. In my rest of my book, I haven't done anything. So the next thing I want to do, I want to make sure my glass is going to fit. So it's going to sit recessed in there, and then eventually this will get glued down, and that is going to permanently capture that piece of glass. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do, and I did this different in the last one. I didn't glue these together yet. So I thought I'm going to try and see if I can go ahead and glue these together so that they're all one unit, if that makes a difference in the rest of my book. And I don't think it will. So I went ahead and actually used a glue stick, and I've done it on this one. Is use a glue stick, again, put something, a piece of book page or something to protect your book. And then I just went around this entire frame, one page at a time, and with the glue stick and glued that down, and then put some weight on that and let it dry. So now this frame is one piece, and that's where my glass is going to sit again and be captured. Okay, and that way it lays flush. Okay, so the next thing that I need to do then is the same thing. I have this one glued together. My glass is here. I need to figure out my pages to cut through for those recessed sides. So this is going to capture my glass. I'm going to leave another section of pages that are going to capture my artwork piece, and the rest are going to be those spacers in the center that keep those two things apart. Okay, so what I did is I'm taking now, again, I need for this dimension, I need my glass to sit on top of this, okay? But I want to see through for this 3.5 by 5.5. So again, I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to mark my 3.5 by 5.5 opening, and I have that here, and you can see this is my 4x6. I don't want to cut this 3.5 by 5.5 because I'm going to see those edges right there. I want to find some measurement in between all the way around so that I have a little bit of edge. I'll have a little bit of edge for my glass to sit, but then I won't see this page edge. They will sit a little bit inside of this opening. So I want to find some measurement in between, okay? So I have another one somewhere here. where I have created that in-between measurement. So here's my 3.5 by 5.5. My 4 by 6 is all the way out, and that in-between measurement is where I want to cut. And I want to cut through all of this thickness, and I have left out that thickness that's going to hold my artwork. We're going to do that later. So we need to do this part first. So in order to make this easier to cut, I would want to put a piece of cardboard or something here so that I don't cut all the way through. I could use this later because it's going to take me a while to get through all of these layers. So what I would do is take this. I'm going to use some bulldog clips. These are just little 1-inch bulldog clips. And for if you haven't been watching this series, for all of my materials and things that I use, there's links also down in the description. I just keep that list running and growing from the whole series. So you'll see a lot of things in there from some of the other previous videos. So I have that clipped out of my way. And then I just want to cut that, not the inside one, but that next line. That was my in-between measurement. And I'm going to do that through this whole thickness. Now, the way to make this easier to do is you can see these are all put together. I used PVA glue, and in my case, I used my Langnickel neutral pH adhesive. This is just PVA glue, but it's for bookbinding glue. So it's archival. You can use any PVA glue as long as it's, if you want it to be archival, you want to pay attention to that. So you're just going to glue, this is just one coat. When I finish the whole book, I'm going to do another coat. Not that it's necessary for here, but it will just blend all of these pages will look cohesive. So you have them all together. I just do that and let them dry. When I glue it, I use a piece of the sticker backing just from my shipping labels. Put a piece, to protect both sides. You take these off and then maybe put a little weight on it and let that glue dry. So I've already done that, and now I'm to the point where I can cut this out. So again, I want to protect and not cut through these pages because this is going to be, again, a different size to hold my artwork. So you can use a piece of cardboard or something and just so that you don't go through too far. So this one, same thing. I made my marks out where I can see where I start and stop. And you're just going to take your time and cut these. The nice thing is because they're only glued on the edge, as you cut just a few pages at a time, you'll be able to remove those and you won't need to use a ruler anymore. Once you get down a little bit, you'll just be following that same line all the way through, which means, it's not going to be perfect, but I kind of like, this kind of tattered little thing that you can still see that this was a book that you were cutting up. So, I like how that looks organic in that way. So this is going to take me a little bit of time to do. So I'll cut through this one and then I'll come back and we'll finish off the rest of this. I did go ahead, in my case, I'm going to use for these, I used a magnetic closure. And so these magnets are just 2 millimeters thick. You can see how thick it is on this side here. So I went ahead just with a regular size, your standard size hole punch, and punched that hole. You can do that later also, you don't have to do it now, but I know that when I go to cut this, I want to make sure I have room, so I went ahead and punched that there, and then we'll put the magnet in later. So now I just need to cut these out. So I will come back when I am finished cutting these pages out, and we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so I'm back, and that took a while. That is the messiest, this is probably the messiest, most tedious, time-consuming part of this project is getting this center part cut out. So it does tire out your hands. That's why this one is good. I did end up having to pull out a smaller X-Acto knife because when you get this deep, this blade is, does not get into the corners nice because it's just too deep. So I had to use a smaller knife, which takes a little longer. And then even then getting these corners cut out is really difficult when you get to the bottom. So I ended up just kind of ripping those pages out and having to go back with this knife from the back side once I got all the way through and kind of cut out these corners to get them a sharper corner. And then you do end up with lots of tattery, you know, pages. Like I said, it gets more difficult as you get down. I did accidentally go through, even with my cardboard there, because cardboard's, you know, you can cut it, and I did go through, but this ends up getting glued down, so it won't affect that at all. So you can, I cleaned this up. I don't mind having some of the little tattered bits, so I like to, you know, I don't mind leaving some, but I had quite a few, so I kind of just cleaned that up and then used a little sanding block or sandpaper just to kind of clean up this inside a bit and make it, you know, a little bit more finished. You can always paint this black depending on what your color palette you're going to use and all of that. I like to see that it's book page inside. This one was the book page inside also, but I painted it black because that was just what I wanted to do for this particular piece of art. And again, on this one, you can see that I just left book page. So it's just a different look. Okay, so the next steps that you need to do are, I need to prepare, before I glue anything in, I want to prepare where the artwork is going to sit now. So I'm going to draw this is going to be really kind of a crookedy sort of shape because my cutting is not perfect, but it lets me see where this opening is. And then what I need to do is I need to cut out a little larger than this cutout so that when this is glued down and closed, the opening here is larger than this opening. And that way my artwork will sit rested on this, and then this will be glued down. And so it will create a recess for that piece of artwork. So then I will cut my substrate for my artwork from, I could use one of these pieces I cut out as a pattern. So it's just the opposite of, you know, this is capturing the glass and this will capture the piece of artwork. Okay, so that's my plan. Now these are crooked here, and I want to also, this is a little more difficult because when you open a book, you know, these pages now are not sitting right on top of each other. So you really want to try to have them as if the book was closed as much as you can. So I'm going to work with getting my pattern onto this top piece. So I'm just going to use my sewing ruler because it's just an easier thing to do. And if I can get a 1/4 inch all the way around, that will leave me a 1/4 inch, you know, around for my artwork to sit. So I'm going to go to the crooked line and I'm just going to try to square that up because I have, you know, this has kind of grid lines on it. So I can go and get a sharp corner here. And then I can do the same thing here. And I just want to leave enough room so that when I put my magnet in, I'm there. Oops. And then I started my line over here. And then again, try to square that up. So now you can see my opening is very crooked, but my substrate, I'm going to measure this because it looks a little off here, so that when I cut a substrate, it's going to be something that's even. So let's see, that's like 4 1/4. Okay, that looks a little better. So that ended up being 4 1/4. And I could just make it be 4 by 6, but I want to make sure I have that straddled enough. So this means this is probably a little bit bigger than, yes, my 3 1/2 by 5 1/2, because when you're cutting, you're trying to, you know, you end up kind of going larger. So this way it is 6. So I'm about 4 1/4 by 6. So that's fine. Okay, so I need to cut this out, again, being very careful to try to have them stacked on top because I don't have very many to go through. It's not as hard. Now, I was thinking, I didn't do this on the last ones, but I was thinking that leaving this loose, once my artwork is in, I could just glue this around just the edges or double stick tape or something, just to make a nice clean back. Now I do have this cut, but that's not the end of the world. So I think I might try doing this one, leaving it loose. And then I put my plate here anyway. Okay, so maybe I'll use this mat since my cardboard was not a good protection, and try to put the mat in between here. It's a little awkward, but I can even it up once I have it finished, and I can come from the other side. But this is going to be the kind of the best I can do here. So I'm just going to find my line. Maybe I'll try from this side because I'm all the way to the edge. Let me get all the way to the edge and use that as my guide. I think will be easier. Okay. And I need to take these off. Let's see if I can cut this from the other side. Okay, that was a little awkward to do on camera, but I have that now cut out. And I do like the fact that I punched the hole first because I made sure I allowed myself enough room. So you can see when I have this closed, once I get this glued down, I have a space around the edge to hold my piece of substrate for my artwork. And then I can use, because I cut this out of that, I can use this as a pattern to cut my substrate. So that is one thing I need to do. Okay, so now I have all of my things cut. So I could put the glass in now that, you know, once you know this is all ready to go, you can glue all these things down. So I'm just going to use a glue stick maybe and get that stuck down. And I'm just using my Yoo-Hoo glue stick, which is also archival, I believe. Just get some of these little, they're all going to be glued down in the end, but. Oh, and one more thing I need to do is, I like to, this is unfinished here, it's just the chipboard color. You can leave it like this, or I like to use a Posca paint pen and just from the inside so that I don't get it on the front. You could use paint, this is just easier. I just don't want to see any little white. I'll get a smaller one for the corner. This is just a little Posca paint with a brush tip. That just allows me to get into those tight corners. But that way I have just a little more finished look on that, and I don't see any white. I do see a little bit here. Touch that up. You want to do this obviously before you put the glass in. Just check my work. Make sure you clean your book. And then I can put the glass in. So the glass is going to go here. And I'm going to use just some art glitter glue for this part. And I need to glue this to the book. Before, when I did this, I just used the glue stick because I glued all of these pages at the same time. But in this case, I did this whole little section together first, so I had to glue it down to the rest of the book block. And once you do this, you can, once I get it put together, I'll put it under some weight so that I can get some of those ripples out. So next, my glass goes in. And you probably want to clean it first, but you can clean it after it's in, and that fits there. And then I'm going to glue the front cover down, and I'll put it under some weight and let that dry. Okay, I'll put this under a little bit of weight for a few minutes, and then I will be back and we'll finish the back part. Okay, I let that dry for a few minutes. I probably should leave it longer, but I want to finish this video, and so I'll probably put it under some books again for a little bit of time. But let's get on to the back part here. Okay, so same thing on this side. I want to just glue these down one at a time to the book so that they're all one unit. And I'll just use my glue stick and do this real quick here. And you just want to make sure that you stack your hole punched holes right on top of each other so that you can put your magnet in. I also did that part, sort of the reverse of what I did in the previous one, and I think this way is easier. It's going to be easier to get my magnets lined up by punching the hole first and then putting the one on the other side, because it doesn't really matter, if it's exactly centered or anything. It's just, and you could always, if you felt like, say you're using a different book and you felt like the one magnet wasn't enough, you could always, put two or something like that. Just, my other two worked fine, so I'm not worried about the weight. But I suppose if the weight of your artwork is more, you might need an extra, an extra strength for your closure. I'm just doing a little collage with an old skeleton key, so it's not too bad. But like I said, because these are, you can do three-dimensional art, you might have some kind of heavier assemblage that you're putting inside. It's nice that the hole that you punch is a little bit bigger than the magnet, just slightly. It fits in there nicely, but you have a little bit of play. So if your pages aren't exactly lined up, it should still work. But I'm gluing each of these down, but I'm also going to go around the edge with another coat of my PVA. And so that is going to even, stick everything down even better. Okay, so I have that all glued down. It goes this way. And I have my opening for my piece of artwork to sit there. Okay, so I just need to put the magnet in, and you notice I put a hole here so that it will close. And my magnets are, I'm just going to use a little bit of my art glitter glue right in the hole. And that sits nice and flush. Now I want that to dry before I attach the other side, because I don't want it to pull out. So I'm going to go ahead and actually I could put the other half on and then put it under some heavy weight again and just not open it, because the way I'm going to do this is I'm just going to stick the other magnet on. Right on top of this magnet. That way they're lined up. And then put a little glue and then put it under heavy books, and then everything can sit and dry. So I will put a little dab of art glitter glue here. And then it lines up. That was easier than the way I did it last time. So I'm going to let this dry, and then we'll cut the substrate and we'll finish up here. Okay, so while that was drying, I took the time to, I have my magnet. I must have had a little bit of glue in it, kind of tore on this page. So I may end up, I don't know, I may end up leaving this or tear this out. I'll probably just go ahead and leave it. But anyway, it has the closure on it, which works. And I'm ready for my artwork. So I did, while that was drying, I did go ahead and cut my first substrate. So we'll see. I think I need to trim it a little bit more to fit just off of one edge. And then I'll be able to go ahead and work on my artwork. And I'm probably going to wait until I have all of the books done. And you know, that's going to take me some time now to do that, because it's a slow, tedious process. So I have my substrate. If I was only making one, I could go ahead and do that artwork. But my plan, if you looked at the books that I did before, I took the front cover, I swapped them and used the front cover I cut out and as part of my artwork. And I have 6 more to be working on. So I did go ahead and painted the black on the inside of all of them, so that part's finished. And then I did also do that on these. But I have a feeling that it fits pretty well, because, you know, it's my back opening ended up being a little larger. So I could leave them to fit like that and then collage on those and add my skeleton key. But I may trim them down and then repaint them, because I do think it looked kind of nice to have them be a little bit smaller inside, because I did a collage of music paper and book page and that kind of thing around the edge. So I may do that, cut these down, and then I will decide which one goes in which book, so that I've mixed them up and, you know, kind of go from there. The other thing is I may go ahead, we'll see, I may go ahead and do this on camera, even if it's just to music, of me creating these, or at least maybe tell you my plan for them and then do the actual collaging to music. So I'm going to do that in a separate video, because it's going to take time since I'm working on 6 of them and I don't have my pages cut out. So that's it for today. I hope that you enjoyed this and you're inspired to try your own Reader's Digest shadow box for your collectibles. But I think it's just going to, instead of having all my things, you know, in a drawer, now I can hang them on the wall. I don't really have wall space in my studio, so some of these could end up in my Etsy shop. I don't know if anyone is interested in buying something like that. I'm trying to do multiples of things, so that maybe I could do a little show or a little local gallery thing, or, you know, for whatever. So I don't know, we'll see. Anyway, I hope, oh, and the other thing is all the book pages that I have, I've put in I don't want to waste anything, so I've put those in my paper mache basket. So I need to make some more vessels. So if you have not been following along with the series, I have been making little paper mache vessels out of my stripy papers as well. So just a place to put my pens and things. So I will put a link to that video, the vessel video, because it's a great place to use up all of these scraps of book page now. So I hope that's another idea. If you haven't watched that one, check it out. So that's it for me today. Have a great rest of your day. Now go make something. Bye.